This video covers the instructions for assembling out of the box your bandsaw from Sealey's. This particular one is the SM1303, but most of the things I'm going to tell you apply to the larger versions as well. The first thing we need to do to check the blade is to mount the table, which is this piece here. And we slide that, there's a slot here. We slide the slot over the blade and then drop it down in position. And there are 3 slotted holes that accept 3 countersunk screws, which have got hex ends to them. So if we pop those in position first of all, there we go. So you just wriggle them around until they get in the right position. And then there's washers and nuts to go on the underside. So I'll quickly put those in position now. As I say, you only need to do this finger tight initially, because what we need to do is to check that blade. There's a small amount of adjustment on the table. You can move it left and right and back and forward a little bit, which should accommodate the blade anyway. And there's a part that we need to apply in a minute called the blade insert. And that will show us exactly where the blade is sitting. And you want to get it, as I said, just so they're just finger tight. But we can still move the table. And now we put in the table insert, which is this plastic piece here, and that goes into the center and you press it down firmly, and what you're looking at, that should click into position, and it should be slightly, ever so slightly, either flush or slightly rebated to the surface. You don't want it sitting proud, because that will cause problems when you're passing timber through it or plastic past the blades. Now, what we need to do now is do an inspection of the blade and see if the blade is sitting in the center of that groove. In this case, I need to move it over to there. Now we're in a position, it's in the right place. We can finally tighten these up, and you'll need to use 10mm end of this spanner, which comes complete with the tool, and then nip them up tightly. I'll quickly do that. There we are. Last but not least, so that's fitted the table in position. The next thing we need to make sure of is whether the table is at 90 degrees to the blade. Firstly, we need to make sure that this section here is fully raised up. And if you look at the back of the machine here, we then got a locking screw on the back, and then we can then wind this up and down to suit the workpiece. So in this case, I want to wind it as far up as it will go, and I can then retighten it. And then you just need something which is, you need to check it with a set square that it's at 90 degrees, and slide that up to the blade. And as you can see, that's perfect. It's sitting at 90 degrees. So this is sitting correctly at the moment as we speak. Now, if the table isn't correct, at the back here, you've got the release lever, and press that in now, and that allows you to slacken off the fixing bolt, so the table can be moved to different angles. Now, the important thing here is, we're assuming now that it's not in the correct position, and I need to then make sure I've got it sitting square. So yet again, you can see the blade is now out of alignment. So I need to raise it up until it's sitting where it should be. And when it's correct, tighten the adjusting lever at the back, lock it up, and now that's now held. But what we need to do is underneath, we've got the bolt. Once you've got your table correctly adjusted, you wind it out so it just touches the underside of the table. Don't push it out, just so it just rests against the underside. And there's a locking nut you can see underneath there as well. And we get that so it's locked in position. And what that's doing now is ensuring that if you need to adjust the table to do angled cuts, when you've finished, you can just push it back. The table will rest down on the top of that bolt, and you know it's correct at 90 degrees, and you just retighten at the back here again. And your table set up. The next stage on, we've got the U-bracket that goes in at the front here. That needs to be secured. You've got countersunk bolts that go through, But on the underside, you have knurled nuts that then attach to the other side. We tighten that up like so. And then the other one. And the last thing we need to check at this stage is whether the blade is correctly adjusted for tension. So with this section fully wound up, we then press in the middle and just see how much the blade flexes. And you see it flexes a little bit, but not too much. That's fine, okay? The other thing you can check, if we open up the casings here, and open both of these up, there we are. So as you can see here, we've got the pulley wheels that go around with the blade running on them. The blade should sit centrally on that wheel, and in this case that's sitting pretty much right, just slightly towards the back. So I can adjust this, and I'll show you how we do that in a second. What we need to do is just rotate it first of all, just make sure it doesn't move at all. And I can hear on this now, that's rubbing on one of the bearings. So what I'm going to show you next is how to adjust that blade so it sits in the middle of the wheel. And then we've got bearings that sit either side of the blade and also at the rear. And we need to adjust that. There's a set above and there's also a set below the table here as well. And I'll show you in a second exactly how we do that. Okay, as I mentioned before, in our case, the blade is sitting too far towards the back of the machine on the pulley wheel. And we need to adjust that, which is known as tracking, to make that sit in the center of the wheel. So the blade should be central on the wheel. And what we need to do this is, first of all, there are bearings here, which we need to slacken off and pull backwards. And then also slacken off the Allen bolt here and here on the blade guides so that they can move back as they need to. And we repeat the operation underneath with the lower ones, exactly the same. Undo those. And then the other one on the bearing is a little bit more difficult to get to. It's a tighter space, but that's now done. We can now adjust the blade, the tracking of the blade. And what we need to do first of all, on the adjusting knob, you've got a locking nut, and we need to back that anti-clockwise so we can make the adjustment. And to make the blade come forwards, we turn the knob on the back anti-clockwise. If it was sitting at the front, nearer to the front, we'd tighten it clockwise to make the blade go backwards. And what we do is very, very slowly, a little bit of adjustment at the time, because you don't want the blade to come off of the pulley. You slowly rotate the blade and make a little of adjustment at a time until that blade is sitting in the center of the wheel. And that is now perfect. Just give it a couple of revolutions to make sure that it's okay. The final thing is to tighten the lock nut on the adjusting nub on the back of the machine. Then what we need to do is to reposition firstly the bearing guide on the back. We bring that up to the blade so it touches the back of the blade, and then back it off a fraction. Is actually the ideal gap is 3/4 of a millimeter, so it's only tiny. And then once it's in the desired position, you tighten the Allen bolt on the outside. What this does, it prevents the blade being pushed backwards too far when you're sliding your workpiece through and cutting on the machine. The next thing we do is push the two blade guides back up to the blade itself, and then 2 complete revolutions of a pulley wheel, like so, and then tighten the 2 Allen bolts that hold the blade guides. And yet again, we'll repeat that operation on the guides and the bearing underneath as well. There we are. And that's how you adjust the tracking on your blade. The next thing we'll cover now is how to change a blade, so removal and replacement of the blade. Okay, so the next thing we're going to cover is removal and replacement of a blade. So the first thing we need to do, very importantly, is to make sure we're wearing the right sort of equipment, which is PPE, personal protective equipment. Safety specs for starters. I'll pop those on now. For the first operation, I won't put the gloves on. They need to be leather gloves ideally, or stout gloves, because I just need to slacken off the U-bracket here. So the first thing I'll do is loosen one side, slacken it off a fair bit, and then remove the knob completely on the other side. There we go. I can now swing that bracket out of the way, and that will allow us to then retract the blade out of the table. Now I need to put the gloves on, and the first thing we need to do is to slacken off the adjustment on here by turning it anti-clockwise, like so. I'll move around this side so you can see more clearly. That will allow this pulley wheel to drop down. Put your thumb over the front like this, and then we can slide the blade off and feed it through the blade guard like so, and draw it out from the table. And obviously in this case this is a brand new blade, so reverse procedure for refitting. So through the table first of all, making sure obviously the teeth are facing, when you're doing this, the teeth are facing towards you, and then back into the blade guard like so. And then this is the fiddly part. Now we need to feed it back down onto the bottom pulley. And what you're aiming for here is that when you get the blade back on the pulley wheels, which I say is, as you can see, is fiddly, the blade needs to be sitting roughly central back on the pulley like so. And once you've got where you're happy you've got it in the middle of the pulley wheel, tighten the adjustment knob a little bit at a time, and then double check your position is right before you tighten too much. Mine's moved backwards a little bit on the top pulley, so let's move that back again. That's roughly about right now, and then tighten the adjustment knob further. The next thing we need to do is to make sure that the tension is right on the blade. I'll take my glove off of this. We need to undo the locking nut on the back here, like so, which allows us to raise and lower the blade guard. And the blade guard should be as far up as it possibly can be, and then re-tighten the locking nut on the back. And what we're aiming for here is when you press on the middle of the blade, that there's only a small amount of deflection. Now at the moment that's not quite tight enough, so I'll give it a little bit more tension, and that's just about right now. Now finally, the next stage we need to do, I'll put my gloves back on for this, is rotate slowly the top pulley wheel, and keep an eye on the blade and make sure it's running correctly. Now mine needs adjusting backwards. To make it go backwards, I need to back off the locking nut on the back of the machine again and tighten clockwise. But if it was the other way around, it would be anti-clockwise and it will throw the blade forwards. But as I say, in my case, it's the other way around, so I'll continue rotating the blade until it goes back into the center of the wheel. Just a little bit at a time is all you're looking for. That is now absolutely spot on. So I can now retighten the adjusting locking nut like so. And finally, with my gloves off, I can now reattach the U-bracket and put the knob back on again. And tighten those back up again. And the final thing you need to do would be to adjust your bearings top and bottom, and also your blade guides to make sure that they're sitting correctly again. Okay, if you have a problem turning your machine on and off, it can be caused by the micro switches which are fitted on each of these two doors. There's one mounted in here and one at the top. When the pin is pressed in, you should hear an audible click, like so. Now the idea of that is that there is a pin on a plate mounted to the door, and that should coincide with this switch. So when you shut the door, that switch is then depressed, and that completes the circuit so that the power can run through the machine. Now obviously during transit or during the lifetime, it's possible the nuts on it could come loose and it might need adjusting, and if so, you'd need to undo the two nuts which are locking nuts on the underside there, and then the whole pin can be slid left to right to make an adjustment so that it will press on that switch correctly. The other thing that you can do as well is if you've completed that and it should be working, it's still not functioning, check the fuse in the 3-pin plug. That's the other thing that you can do. For other videos and how-to instructional guides, please visit our website at www.sealey.co.uk.